What you see here is part of a national phenomenon that we call high-tech wreck, a phenomenon that had to happen when the TV set married the computer.
We are well aware of how popular video games are. Over the years, we've seen them influence just about every form of entertainment, even being debated as being art. Everyone's heard of them, and most have enjoyed playing them. But did you know there was a time when they almost went away?
Video games are the latest craze to sweep the country and most of the world too. Millions of people are addicted to hours of gazing at electronic images on game screens in arcades and in their own homes.
And then they come in every day. They just can't wait to get back to try and do better on the game.
In several states, parent groups are trying to pass laws regulating the use of the machines.
Our story begins in 1972, the year the original video game console was released, the Magnavox Odyssey. Development of the Odyssey was overseen by a small team led by Ralph H. Baer, creator of not only the first video game system, but the first light gun as well. When it was originally released in September of 1972, the Odyssey went on to sell 350,000 units until it was discontinued in 1975. The system was originally packaged with dice, paper money, and board game pieces that worked alongside a huge game card.
Yes, it's a very, very interesting one and very detailed, and I think people will have a great deal of fun playing it.
The Odyssey's table tennis function would eventually be the inspiration for the original arcade hit Pong. Baer would even go on to sue the creators of Pong for patent infringement. However, that wouldn't stop the game from becoming the success that it was.
Nevertheless, the Magnavox Odyssey's legacy would be known as that of the original video game system. Although the Odyssey had limited capabilities, the system would set the standard for later video game systems to improve upon.
Now at your Magnavox dealer.
Leading us to the group that set the bar. The creators of Pong would form their own company. That company would be known as Atari.
Tonight we'll see and hear firsthand
this kind of sound. Let's hear the rest of it.
No other company offers you as many different video game cartridges as Atari.
Established in Sunnyvale, California, two men, Norm Bushnell and Ted Dabney, set out to form their own company after the meteoric success of their computer table tennis game.
The company would, however, undergo the first change in 1973. Bushnell's partner, Dabney, felt like he'd been left out during several meetings concerning the manufacturing processes of their machines. He'd even find out later on that Bushnell patented his video circuit concept without Dabney as the sole creator.
No, George. Mine.
Feeling mistreated, Dabney would leave Atari in March of 1973, even selling his portion of the company for $250,000. Today, those shares would be worth more than $1.6 million.
Thus bringing us to the creation of Atari's first video game console 2 years later, the Atari 2600. The console that would turn them into superstars, setting the bar for future consoles.
The system would allow players to experience not only Pong, but all of their past and current video game classics. During this time, Atari would experiment with Pong microconsoles, allowing players to take the arcade hit home.
You're watching the most exciting game you will ever see on your TV set.
Development would continue until Atari finally revealed their 2600 console in October of 1977. The system would achieve lifetime sales of 30 million units. This would be the biggest success of Atari in the company's history.
In 1978, a new Japanese machine appeared on American shores.
Although it looked innocent enough, this machine turned out to have some unusual powers. It kept kids mesmerized for hours, made teenage boys forget about girls, and even caused business executives to skip the 3-martini lunch.
Video games were quickly becoming the newest sensation, rivaling that of the entertainment industry's established leaders. Atari was one of the figureheads of this new trend. However, their success wouldn't go without changes and new competition.
In 1977, Warner Communications would buy Atari Inc. for $28 million. Bushnell felt that in order for the company to grow, they would need the capital. And with the stock market being in poor shape at the time, selling was the only viable option. However, for Bushnell, this decision would result in him being forced out in 1978. The main reasons were disputes with Warner over the future direction of the company and the lifespan of the 2600. A man by the name of Raymond Kasser would later take its place.
1978 saw the release of Magnavox's new console, the Odyssey 2, coming in direct competition with Atari's 2600. Although the Odyssey 2 shared the Atari's concept of allowing play of various different games, the Odyssey wasn't able to overtake the 2600's dominant position. It would still sell moderately well, over 1 million units in the US alone.
More menacing. Pickaxe lead from Odyssey 2 when the keyboard is the key to greater challenge.
Also during this time, Atari's other business venture would continue to boom as well, arcades. In what would be considered the golden age of arcade gaming, games like Space Invaders, Asteroids, Tron, Donkey Kong, and Pac-Man would go on to be massive hits, garnering their own cartoons, songs, and even movies.
Arcades did so well that it actually affected other industries' sales revenue during the time.
In 1980, Americans spent $3.3 billion playing video games. That's more money than the total combined budgets for the cities of Chicago, Boston, Washington, Dallas, and Cincinnati last year.
The music industry alone took a large hit, seeing a decline of over 400 million credited directly to arcade popularity. This caused so much concern that an anti-video game movement began with people trying to regulate and control arcade gaming.
We went to a town meeting in Irvington, New York, where the citizens were considering passing an ordinance to prevent young teenagers from playing the games and to restrict the number of games that would be allowed in the town.
The gaming industry was doing very well and cemented its position in pop culture. Arcades were booming, and the console market was becoming very successful as well. However, Atari would not be without its growing pains.
In 1979, Atari programmers David Crane, Larry Kaplan, Alan Miller, and Bob Whitehead went to then Atari CEO Ray Kaster and demanded that the company treat the programmers like record labels treated musicians. They wanted their names displayed, recognizing them for their hard work. They felt they were the best and should be given credit. However, Kaster would reject their request, claiming anybody can do a cartridge.
The four programmers would leave Atari later that year and found their own company in October of '79. That company would be the first third-party development studio ever. The company was, and still is, called Activision. Unlike Atari, Activision would credit themselves, devoting a page for the developer in the instruction manuals.
Pitfall, designed by David Crane for Activision.
Activision would go on to make up more than half of Atari's cartridge sales. This would eventually lead to legal action between the two over the ability to put unlicensed Atari games on the 2600. Activision would win the suit in 1982.
Also during this time, two new competitors would come to release their own consoles. In 1979, Mattel Electronics released their answer to the 2600, the Intellivision. And in 1982, Coleco would release their ColecoVision.
Intellivision would sell over 3 million units, while the ColecoVision sold over 1 million units. Not only did the two systems create steady competition for Atari, but their systems would be capable of better-looking games in the 2600.
This would cause Atari to go back to the drawing board and create their own system with improved graphical capabilities. However, it would prove to be an uphill battle. Little did these companies know, the problem was brewing.
I'd like an Atari 2600 system, please, and everything that goes with it. Everything? You sure want everything? I want everything. Now you get a new low price, up to $30 in rebate offers, and a free pack. Is that everything? Not everything. You can get nearly 300 different cartridges. 300? That's nothing. Something. But it's not everything. Soon there'll be a voice module, a trackball, remote control joysticks, and a computer keyboard. Amazing!
Video game bubble was expanding rather quickly, and companies like Atari were getting cocky, putting almost impossible development times on products with the hopes of putting games out more frequently. However, a lack of quality control would help to cause the industry's downfall.
Underdeveloped games like the notorious movie-based game E.T. were filling store shelves instead of Atari's previous offerings, and people were starting to take notice.
Not only that, but the arcade developers were finding that the arcade industry was also getting crowded. A quarter was no longer viable for being profitable, estimating that in order to make any money they'd have to charge $1 instead.
Prices were raised to keep up with other games, and because of that, the arcade industry began to falter. Arcade cabinet manufacturing costs could go upwards from $2,000 to $3,000, not to mention the rent fees from the buildings holding them. Unfortunately, it wouldn't be enough, as multiple arcades around the world would eventually begin to close their doors due to lack of interest from the public.
The common theme of the crash was this: the industry got too big for its own good, and the people in charge were struggling to keep up. The bubble had officially burst, and at a time when marketers thought that the gaming industry would be at its most profitable, it was clear the exact opposite would happen.
However, an interesting urban legend that was later confirmed true came about because of the crash. Atari had created too many cartridges, and it was estimated that they'd never sell. So one night, in September of 1983, Atari filled a truck full of cartridges and took them to New Mexico. The cartridges were crushed and buried under the cover of night.
Unfortunately for Atari, their stock would plummet. The arcade and console divisions of Atari would split up as a result. The arcade division would be rebranded as Atari Games, and the console division was named Atari Corp.
Atari Corp would continue developing hardware after the crash. Their first creation would be the Atari ST, their very own home computer. It's important to note that another reason for the crash was the rise of the home computer.
Companies like Apple and IBM were coming out of the woodwork, introducing the consumer to the world of home computing. As a result of the video game crash, developers came to journalists requesting that they never use words like games or fun when describing their product. They wanted to avoid being grouped into gaming as much as possible.
Although the crash led people to stray away from video game arcades and consoles, arcades would see a resurgence in the 90s thanks to companies like Capcom for releasing video games like Street Fighter. It also wouldn't be the end of the home console market thanks to a Japanese development company named Nintendo.